All right, guys, we got a sick Chane list to present to you guys, but Chane's one of those decks that could be a little tougher to get over the top. That's why I got Ian here. And Ian
Yeah.
is one of the members of HometownTcg ASCENT that is offering coaching to players in the HometownTcg Discord. I'll be giving away for this month. Stick around to the end of this video to find out how to win. All right, dude, let's get into this deck. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back right here to HometownTcg. You guys might know me. My name is Josh, but I got a special guest here today.
Yeah, I'm Ian, Deadlybarricuda, and a member of Team Ascent, and I'm here to talk about Chane.
And Ian is coming off a hot win this evening. Is that not correct?
Played against a Viserai opponent, and they tried to aggro me down, and it didn't work. So
Yes.
feeling good.
All right, so we got a Chane deck tech coming your guys' way, and Ian is out here to prove to all of us, to the masses, that the king is not in fact dead. Chane lives on, and not only is healthy, but is dominating this format. And you've seen some success with Chane at the competitive level, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I took him to Indy. I went 8-4. There were a couple really tight matches that, looking back at, I can see different lines that might have gotten me the win. He just feels really good right now, so.
Okay, and then finally, before we pop over to the actual list itself, I want to ask you, with the loss of Seeds of Agony and stuff like that, is there something that is now picking up that slack? Is there anything new that makes you feel like, oh, this is what makes Chane viable, or was he always just good, even without Seeds?
I think he was always just good, even without Seeds. Obviously, your blood debt count is a lot lower, so you're not quite as lucky all the time in flipping over your blood debt, but you just have so much power in the sometimes you get an extra card, and you can give go again, and you get all these really powerful non-blood debt effects. I don't know. Chane's just great. He's always been great.
Well, dude, I'm excited to get into this, so let me swap us over to your actual list. And this is a list, I believe you said you won with this list tonight, correct?
Yeah, yep. And this is the exact 80.
All right, well, this is the 80. Let's start with the core, the crux of every list. We're going to take a look at the equipment here. Go ahead and give us a rundown of your main board equipment. What's the spice here? What do we got?
This is standard in every way, and I think if you deviate from this as your standard package against aggro decks, you're doing something wrong. We got Rosetta Thorn. It's still the best Runeblade weapon in the game, and we get to give it go again sometimes, so that's great. We have Skullcap and Grasp, standard equipment for standard blocking purposes, and Grasp lets us filter on turn 1. Carrion Husk is probably the best aggro equipment in the game because it lets you pivot and keep a 5-card hand. And Spellbound Creepers took a while to learn how to play with that card, but it is really bonkers when you get it to work.
So that is new tech back from, I'm going to be like the curmudgeon-y old man. Back in my day when I played Chane, the Snapdragon Scalers, where obviously Spellbound Creepers hadn't come out yet and everything, but you feel that Spellbound Creepers gives you just more value over Snapdragon Scalers.
I do, yeah. I think it's pretty easy against opponents who bring all armor against you to activate Spellbound Creepers upwards of 3 times.
Oh my goodness.
With some of our 2-damage arcane effects, we can activate creepers twice against aggro decks that only bring 1 null rune. And then on very important turns against fatigue, it is that extra action point or the getting past effects like Blizzard, or making it show shield can't block, or an ice react from Oldhim. All things we can instant speed, pitch a blue, play a non-attack, empty our hand, and just keep on trucking.
Well, it seems, the way you've laid it out, it makes it seem like Spellbound Creepers in this list is OP, because everything it plays around are things that, again, when I processed the idea of playing Chane in my mind, everything you just laid out was a terrifying thing for me, and you're like, oh, Spellbound Creepers solving all these problems. So that is so awesome, and it looks like you got some interesting sideboard equipment pieces, too. Maybe one I didn't expect to see. What's up with the Vexing Quillhand, the Rune Chant generation here?
Yeah, so I think when you're going second against Viserai, it's important to bring in some Arcane Barrier because of the amount of rune chance he can generate on turn 1.
Okay.
And I would, I'm not going to be going first in that scenario, so I don't need to cycle my hand with Grasp. And I think it is the best Arcane Barrier piece we can bring, because sometimes we might actually use the effect to push lethal. Whereas Crown of Dichotomy, we're almost never activating that to put cards on top of our deck. So
Okay, so it's a strictly better null rune, and by strictly better, I mean the only advantage is sometimes it lets you push lethal. So I guess that's a pretty good effect. And then the Aether Ironweave in here. What matchups are you bringing in Aether Ironweave over Husk? I mean, Husk to me is this oppressive monster of a card, and as a Chane noob, I'm like, I never want to be without it. It's like my safety net.
It is a wonderful, wonderful safety net. I find that Aether Ironweave is my safety net against fatigue decks. Specifically fatigue decks that don't have a lot of dominate. So we don't use it against any version of Bravo, but against things like Oldhim or Dorinthia, if she's trying to fatigue us, or Prism, or even Rhinar fatigue of all things. I've seen it done against Chane specifically.
Okay.
These decks don't pressure us as much, and so having the 2 extra resources on our final or the turn before our final turn to generate 30 damage turns, really good.
Well, you just made the clickbaitiest title that we could ask for. You just threw out Reinhardt Fatigue at me. So you and I have now another deck tech scheduled to go over that. But let's not. I'm known for getting off track. Let's not get too far off track. I know you want to talk about the core
another
of this
time.
deck.
Another time.
Yes, another time soon, like tomorrow, because now I want to build it. We want to talk about the core of this deck, and we mentioned Seeds of Agony was. If there was an atom of the Chane deck, Seeds of Agony was the nucleus of that atom. It just did everything you wanted it to do, and now that we're missing that, you've had to come up with a completely almost new core. You're going to see a lot of familiar cards, but they are going to function slightly differently. So walk me through the core of what your Chane deck, what this Chane list wants to do.
Okay, so sort of the core cards that we're never going to leave home without are basically our staple blood deck cards. So we're looking at our red and blue bounding demigons, our ghostly visit, our one-of copy of Howl from Beyond, our rift binds, and then some of our non-blood deck that we always bring are like our shadow puppetries, our soul reaping, our art of war, and then our Maruvian skies and captain's calls. These are a lot of our really powerful Gogan effects that let us have super wide turns. And then we always have a good number of blues. So we're bringing our Shadow Versers, our Shrill of the Skull Form, and our Vexing Malice. We actually are sort of a very expensive deck, just because you have these turns where you have 3 extra cards to play, and you want to make sure that you have enough resources to play those and the cards from your hand. So.
Okay, so I know you don't want to leave, as a Chane player, you never want to leave an action point on the table. You don't want to have that go again and either nothing to do or no way to pay for it. So I love that you've leaned into a ton of blues here. And you just mentioned this as being like the core contingency of the deck, and you talked about some new cards in there that are part of the core contingency of this list, and mainly Swarming Gloomveil. There's been a lot of talk of this card, and I've seen a lot of it in Viserai, but playing it in Chane is interesting. Talk to me about Swarming Gloomveil in Chane and the big argument for it in this list.
Yeah, so there are actually quite a few people who are currently cutting it from their lists. I still really like it a lot, just because I find that some of your biggest damage turns are when you've got this Swarming Gloomveil and you're going to make a Soul Shackle, which is an aura. So it's always going to have Go Again. It's not going to be as powerful as it is in Viserai. It's a little bit harder for us to get to that 4 damage value, let alone the turning off Arcane for the turn on hit. But even just as a 0 for 3, we can really... It just lets us go so much wider and pull cards from our opponent's hands when maybe they don't want to block. You can do something really innocent, like you can shackle and then start with a ghostly visit, and your opponent might say no blocks because they're like, well, you can't do that much more, and then you're like, Swarming Gloomveil, 3 go again, and they're like, oh, I should have blocked this turn. Right.
right. So it kind of gives you that aura of mystery, right?
Yeah, and like it's just this third, maybe even fourth or fifth attack that can come in on chains, because it's free. It's got our go again. We don't need to play one of these non-attack actions or the shackle to generate our go again for it.
Hmm.
I just find that it's very, very flexible. So.
Well, I mean, you've sold me on the card, and you've kind of got me all in on Swarming Gloomveil, and I'm seeing another piece of maybe Everfest tech sitting here on the main board, and it's Runic Reclamation. And I think it's fair to say that Runic Rec is that, that anti-prism card for sure.
100%.
It seems like it does everything you want it to do, but I notice it's not in your sideboard where, something like your Time Snap potions are. You do have it in the main board. Is this card just gas against everybody if you can guarantee it can have go again?
So it's sort of interesting. It actually ends up being a finisher on your chain a lot of the time. We're not necessarily always giving this go again.
Okay.
It's just really nice to, in the early game, when maybe you're only flipping 2 to 3 cards over and you're not hitting that one Blood Debt attack that lets you have a good turn, to be able to say, like, let's go for our Ghostly Visit from hand with go again, and then you might make a Rune Chant and then pitch your other blue and send a Runic Rec for 7.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it's just a really good break point, right? 7 is really good. If Prism weren't in the meta, I would even consider this being Shrill of the Skullform red. Just it's a little cheaper, it's a little easier for you to guarantee it on your turns, but having these really powerful attacks like Command and Conquer for 6, E-Strike for 7, and Runic Reclamation for 7 to end the chain in the early game can just be an unexpected amount of damage, because your opponent is sort of going to expect the play pattern of 3 go again, 4 go again, Rosetta, or some combination thereof. And when all of a sudden you're like, 4 go again, Shackle, send the Rosetta, and then you Runic Rec, they're like, oh, that's more damage than I thought it would be,
Those last 2 cards are much higher value than I anticipated.
Right. They're thinking, oh, maybe he's got like a Bounding Demagogue in hand, and this will be for 3, and he'll arsenal a card, and I'll be looking really good. And then you're just like, 7 damage, and they're like, problem.
Chane's been lifting, dude. The damage is getting bigger and bigger. But you made a point there about these early turns and kind of making sure you have something to end that turn to go over the top, because it's early turns in the game that I find on Chane it's most important for you to be chipping away at your opponent's life total. If you're getting, 3, 4, 5 shackles deep and that life total from your opponent is not dwindling, you start to feel the pressure. You're starting to feel the heat. So I love those big attacks in this deck, and I love the core of this deck, but you've got a lot of auxiliary pieces that seem to not only enable, but support that core. So let's look at some of these auxiliary pieces, and I'm going to let you take the reins, but you already know I have some questions for you in here that I'm stoked about.
Yeah, so one of the things that helps my version of the list guarantee that we can pay for some of these more expensive cards and still have explosive turns in the early game is the Belittle Minnowism package. This was very, very early adopted by Michael Fang and crew at Nationals when everybody was playing Briar. They were like, what if we put Belittle Minnowism in Chane? And so the red Minnowisms can really help power out those early game turns, and then the blue Minnowisms help us in our late game to guarantee we have non-attacks to play sometimes, because we have so many cards that require a non-attack action before they can have an effect or be played from Banish. And sometimes in the early turns, right, we have this big expensive Runic Rec, and being able to belittle and go get a blue Minnowism so that we can play it is really, really good.
I love the notion of using a Belittle Minnowism to tutor up pitch. It's something I've been passionate about since this card package came out. Actually, today there's been tons of chatter about Monarch, surprisingly, and we're going over a Chane deck. I have just been so passionate about the ability to be like, hey, I'm short pitch. Guess what Belittle can do? It can go get me 3 pitch in a normally pretty lean deck. So I love the fact
it's
that's
so
in there.
good.
It
also, like, powers Howl from Beyond. It can be the
Yes.
important non-attack that makes our Revel in Rune Blood go off. It just does so many good things.
This card does so many things that you want it to do. I love that support package in here. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So we got the Belittle package in here supporting what we want to do. What else are we looking at in here?
So we have a cheeky one-of Razor Reflex hiding out in here.
I was hoping you were going to skip it so I could ask you about it. So you got the one-of Razor Reflex, one copy. Is that just because closing the game is so relevant, it's so important, or why? What's the one-of for?
So I find once you starting to reach those top tables, and even not in the top tables, sort of, if you banish one Razor Reflex at any point in the game, your opponent now has to worry about other Razor Reflexes, whether you have them or not.
You are playing mind games at an all-time level, man. What?
So that's its floor. Its floor is our opponent now has to think harder about blocking, especially at low life totals. So our ceiling is it's going to do things like be a go again enabler. You know, our opponent is probably going to be expecting when we send like Ghostly Visit with no go again for this to be a creeper's turn. And so they're going to say, sure, no blocks, I'll block whatever on hit is attached to the next thing because you're going to play, you know, Shadow Puppetry or a Blue Mauvrian Skies with your Spellbound Creepers. And then you're just like, Razor Reflex, 3 extra, and it gains go again. And they're like, huh.
Well, that's a thing.
Wasn't expecting that.
So at the floor, it's a mind game that's throwing people off. And at the ceiling, it enables your go again. It can close out games, which Chane has been known to. When you get down to the bottom, when you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, you've got to close it out.
And the absolute tippy top in this Prism meta is it can pop the boots.
Oh my gosh, it can pop the boots.
It can pop the boots, and that is so big in that matchup when they're trying to fatigue you because the boots are just like a shield. They can block so much damage over the course of the game. And if you're lucky enough to draw this card and like set it up in your arsenal in an early turn and bait that boot block, oh, it feels so good.
Dude, this is why I love looking at your list and getting the chance to talk to you about it. You are playing Chane on a completely different level. You're popping boots. You're playing one of Razor Reflex. I love that card in here. I noticed a popular pick that I'm actually happy to see is a couple of the blues in your blue package here. We're looking at Vexing Malice and Shrill of the Skullform. These are two blues I'm extremely high on. Talk to me about this kind of this package down here.
Yeah, so they look really innocent, but so the important things first. They are blues that block for 3, and I think that's huge. You know, people don't think about blocking very much in Chane, but there are some matchups where decks are a little more aggressive than you in the early game. Lexi can do it, Bolton can do it, there are a couple others where occasionally you're actually going to need a block, right? And so having 3 blocks is just really good. I don't like skimping on them. And then the second thing is, so Shrill is a blue that attacks for 5. And so it can help bridge the gap on some of our off turns and some of our early game turns when we don't draw some of these other threats like Swarming or Runic, or maybe we can't activate Revel this turn. So we have to arsenal it, and you can actually, or you have a heavy blue hand, you can send a blue Shrill for 5 and it's still a respectable amount of damage. And then Vexing sort of plays the other half of that role, where it is really good in the fatigue matchup, because you can, with the go again in the deck, and just with Chane's ability, you can set up turns where you're like, you know, I have a Rune Chane in play, and then I'm going to send this Vexing Malice with go again, and then I'm also going to do an active Rosetta. And so we're presenting multiple instances of 2 Arcane to get over that hump of that 1 Arcane barrier and deal lethal.
Right.
And it's just really, really important to be able to do that, because especially against the Guardians, who almost always only bring 1 null rune against you.
Dude, again, that's insane. I love these selections. Shadowverser obviously still in here. You are running.
Oh yeah, that card's great.
That card's just amazing. It always has been. It's so good. You're running 3 Captain's Calls that you talked about as the core of the deck. And then before we go into the board, is there anything else you wanted to touch on in the main board here before we dig into the sideboard?
Yeah, so just quick shout out to best card in the deck, Art of War. I don't think we really need to talk about this card. It does everything you want to do and could possibly ever want to do in the deck. It's great. And then the Lead the Charge, the one of Lead the Charge could very easily be another Captain's Call. I have it as Lead the Charge right now because sometimes it's nice to get past Arclight Sentinels or clear like double Parable of Humility and other annoying things that Prism does.
And Prism is popular right now, so I like the one of copy in the main board. And speaking of Prism, I mean, dipping right into the sideboard here, right in the bottom, the Time Snap Potions,
Yeah.
you do have some stuff in here for the Prism matchup specifically. So let's talk just the Time Snap Potions just for Prism. Anything else?
I do generally just bring it in against my fatigue matchups. It's an extra go again that sits on the board all game and can really help power out either an Ursa turn or with this specific deck, the game plan is to pitch stack and never use your belittle. So you never search Minnowisms against fatigue. And we're looking to see all 3 Howl from Beyonds and 3 Riftbinds at the end of the game, and to use our Spellbound Creepers and our Time Snap Potion and our Aether Ironweave to just have this massive blowout turn. So even though it obviously gets around Arclight Sentinel for us, which is just sort of an added bonus, I am like, I'm really good at pitch stacking, but sometimes just with how the deck works and putting a card under with Unhallowed Rites, or maybe you draw more cards than you think you did over the course of the game with things like Art of War and your Shadow Puppetry triggers. It gives you some leniency. If you happen to have a red in your hand, it's just already a go again in play that guarantees we have that big turn.
All right, man. It's again, you're thinking about it. I saw the obvious Prism out there, but there's clearly a deeper reason why Time Snap Potion is in here. And you talked about that fatigue matchup. What else in this board is really focused and centric around that fatigue matchup?
Yeah, so the other 2 Howl from Beyonds, like I was talking about just then, are for the fatigue matchup 100% the Eclipse and the Unhallowed Rites. The Unhallowed Rites let us play the Howls early and recur them so that we have them again for that final turn, so we're not missing damage in the mid game and the early game.
Right, okay.
And then we still have them for our final Riftbind turn. And then, of course, we are playing probably 8 Blood Deck cards on our final turn, so we're going to make Ursa, and Ursa's still real good against fatigue.
So the goal is fatigue, have these big turns, use Eclipse, get down Ursa, recur your Howl from Beyonds. You got this thing down to a science, but we left out 4 cards in the board. We got 2 copies of Unmovable, and you called that something very interesting in our pre-game or our pre-video chat here.
Yeah, so I called them a necessary evil of the format. I think generally it is against what Chane wants to be doing to run these really heavy, chonky defense reactions that cost 3. But we live in a world of Bravo Star of the Show. And sure, we've got a Carrion Husk on board that lets us pivot once per game, but sometimes we need to survive the onslaught of them holding a pulse in their hand, and Unmovable really helps us get out from underneath that.
Right. It kind of it's insurance against the idea of Starvo high rolling and going back to back to back, and you just having to say, well, thank you. No matter what I do at this point, I lose. So you're paying for insurance against that. You're saying I still want to express myself as a skilled player, and to do that, sometimes I got to bite the bullet and play these Unmovables. And then we got the 2 100%. Copies of Invert Existence. I love this card. I freaking love this card. This card's so cool. What are we bringing this in against?
This could very easily be 3 inverts and 2 time snaps. The card's so good. So we're bringing it in general against all Rune Blades because they're always going to have a good mix of non-attacks and attacks, and it is good free damage. We get to interact with things like Rattlebones and So Tomorrow as they target cards in graveyards. In the mirror match, it's especially powerful because if we get it when both opponents are at low life total, we can go Invert Existence, deal you 2 damage, put 2 Blood Deck cards back in your banish zone, and you take 2 more damage at the end of your turn, so we can actually kill from 4 against Chane.
That's just so insane. I've loved this card. the card art definitely helps. It's gorgeous card art. So this has been really cool, man. Thank you so much for going over this list. And I'm going to pop back over to just your smiling face one more time, because I want to ask you, you're out here, you're playing Chane, and you talked about we live in a Starvo world and we're playing Chane. What is Chane's biggest strength for those of our viewers out there that want to play Chane, that want to play your ASCENT Chane list? Sell them Chane. Why should they pick up Chane right now?
So I think he has game against every deck in the format. So let's start there. That's a great place to be.
Okay, so you're never out of it.
Yeah, you're never out of it. I never feel like I'm out of it. Even when I make mistakes, sometimes the deck is like, hey, here's an Art of War. Would you like to win? And I'm like, thanks, deck.
I would like to win. How did you know?
Yeah. So, you know, it can sort of win out of nowhere and give you outs that maybe you didn't think you had, which is very powerful, especially in big tournament settings where you're playing, you know, 15 rounds or 12 rounds. Having a deck that can sometimes just win on the spot is great. But more generally, focusing on the big three, I think you are a much better aggro deck than Viserai.
Mm-hmm.
I think you do a great job of beating up on prisms, even when they try and fatigue you, because of the blue auras in the deck now, both being 2-block and turning on your Avert Existence. That matchup is actually slightly easier than it used to be when they fatigue.
Okay.
And then we do actually race Bravo Star of the Show pretty well, unless he starts to high roll you. And that's what those unmovables are for, to sort of even give us an out there.
Right.
It can be trickier when he tries to fatigue you, but we have that package too. So, you know, he's just, I think, in a great place. And I think there's a lot more consistency than Viserai has.
Well, I love the fact that you started this conversation with this. It's a deck that gives you run against anyone else in the format right now, because you guys at ASCENT know more than not that Flesh and Blood is a skill-based game. More often than not, your better player is going to find a way to get the win. And you guys are doing something cool in the HometownTcg Patreon community and Discord, where you're offering coaching. Now, I mentioned this way back in the intro, but I do want to stress it's important that if you want to pick up a deck like this, jump in the HometownTcg Patreon and get some coaching from these guys. This month, I'm going to be giving away 4 coachings. And if you win a coaching, you can pick the hero and your coach. We have coach profiles, so you can get Ian right here to walk you through your Chane build and teach you how the deck should be played in almost any scenario. So that's super cool, you guys, for doing that. I'm stoked.
Yeah.
And one thing you got to say, you got to shout out, what do you have to say to all of, you know, all your Chane players out there? Give them a piece of encouragement. Let them know that you guys are unified. Say one thing to them.
Yeah, always remember that you are the aggro king, and as long as you set your 5-card hand right before you throw that husk, you're gonna get there.
That's great advice. I love to see it, and thank you so much for your time. If you guys want to play this deck, the link to this deck will be in the video description. Ian, thank you so much for your time, and until next time, you guys know me. My name is Josh.
And I'm Ian.
And we will see you around.